The war was over. The battlefield, once filled with the sounds of gunfire and explosions, had fallen silent. Smoke still rose from the ruins of the Zarkali stronghold, a reminder of the fierce battle that had taken place. The human soldiers walked through the wreckage, their armor scratched and worn, but their spirits high. Humanity had won. Captain Daniel Holt stood near a fallen Zarkali banner, staring at the destruction around him. The war had lasted for years, and now it was finally over. The Zarkali, a powerful alien empire that had enslaved many civilizations, had been defeated by the combined strength and determination of humanity. But victory came at a cost. The battlefield was littered with the remains of machines, weapons, and the bodies of those who had fought bravely on both sides. As the human soldiers secured the area, they began gathering the surviving Zarkali prisoners. Among them were soldiers, engineers, and civilians, some terrified, others too proud to show fear. They had been told that humans were cruel conquerors, that they would be treated as nothing more than property. Some accepted their fate, others waited for punishment. That was when Mira was brought forward. She was different from the other Zarkali prisoners. Unlike the armored warriors, she had no weapons, no armor. Her clothes were torn and dirty, her long silver hair tangled. She stood with her head lowered, not out of respect, but because she had learned that looking directly at her captors could lead to pain. The Zarkali had always told her that the strong ruled over the weak, and that to resist was foolish. A human officer, one of the higher-ranking commanders, walked past the line of prisoners, assigning them to different soldiers. Some would be taken as workers, others as servants. Mira heard whispers among the human soldiers. "The spoils of war," one man muttered. "A reward for victory," another chuckled. Mira remained still as the officer stopped in front of her. He looked at her carefully, then turned to Daniel. "Captain Holt," the officer said, "this one is yours." Daniel frowned. "What do you mean, mine?" "She's a war prize. The soldiers deserve rewards for their service. You fought well, so you get first choice." Daniel looked at Mira. She did not react, did not speak. She had seen what happened when captives resisted. She had no reason to expect anything different now. But Daniel sighed and shook his head. "I didn't fight this war for a reward. I fought to stop the Zarkali from enslaving others, not to become like them." The officer laughed. "You always were too soft, Holt. But fine, do what you want with her." He walked away, leaving Mira standing there, unsure of what would happen next. Daniel turned to her, his expression unreadable. "What's your name?" Mira hesitated. A name. It had been a long time since someone had asked for her name. The Zarkali had only called her by a number, treating her as nothing more than a tool. Slowly, she whispered, "Mira." Daniel nodded. "All right, Mira. You don't belong to me. You're free to go wherever you want." She stared at him, confused. Was this a trick? A test? The Zarkali had told her humans were cruel, that they would take pleasure in controlling others. But this human was different. He wasn't looking at her like a thing to be owned. "You must be hungry," Daniel said. He removed a ration pack from his belt and held it out to her. Mira didn't move. "It's just food," he assured her. "You can eat it if you want." Hesitantly, she took the ration. It was a strange feeling, being given something without force, without expectation. She slowly unwrapped it and took a small bite. It wasn't much, but it was food. Daniel watched her for a moment before speaking again. "I have a tent not far from here. If you want, you can rest there for the night. No one will hurt you." Mira didn't answer. She didn't know what to believe. Was this kindness real? Or was it just another trick? Another way to control her? For now, she would wait. She had survived by being cautious, by obeying the strong. But something about this human felt different. As the sun set over the battlefield, Mira sat near the fire, silently watching the humans around her. She was no longer in chains, but she did not yet understand what freedom meant. And for the first time, In a long time, she felt something strange. Mira woke up before the sun had fully risen. The human camp was quiet, with only a few soldiers moving about. She sat up slowly, feeling the rough fabric of the blanket Daniel had given her. It was warm, soft, nothing like the hard, cold floors she had slept on as a prisoner of the Zarkali. She looked around cautiously. No guards stood over her. No chains bound her wrists. She was free to move, but she didn't move. Her mind told her it was a trick. It had to be. Daniel was sitting near the fire, sharpening a knife. He glanced at her and gave a small nod. "Morning." Mira didn't answer. She wasn't sure how to respond. He placed the knife down and grabbed a ration pack, tossing it toward her. She caught it easily, but still didn't open it. Daniel leaned back against a crate, stretching his arms. "You don't talk much, do you?" he said. Mira looked at him, unsure if he expected an answer. She had learned long ago that silence was safer than speaking. Daniel sighed. "All right. I'll do the talking then." He gestured to the camp. "The war is over. Humanity won. You're not a prisoner anymore. You don't have to do anything you don't want to." Mira frowned. Not a prisoner. Then what was she? Daniel seemed to understand her confusion. "Look, I know what the others said. They think you're a spoil of war, a prize. But that's not how I see things. I don't own you. No one does." Mira's grip tightened on the ration pack. His words were strange. "No one owns me." The Zarkali had always told her the strong ruled the weak. That was the law of the universe, and yet this human was saying something completely different. "Eat," Daniel said, nodding toward the food. "You don't have to, but it'll help." She hesitated for a moment before opening the pack. The food was bland but filling. As she ate, Daniel remained silent, giving her space. It was unusual. The Zarkali had never been this patient. After a while, Daniel stood up. "I need to go check on something. You can stay here, or you can come with me." Mira froze. Was this a test? If she refused, would he punish her? If she agreed, would she be walking into a trap? Daniel must have noticed her hesitation because he shrugged. "Your choice, Mira. No one's forcing you." Choice. That word again. She wasn't used to it. But something about Daniel's calm nature made her believe, just for a second, that he might be telling the truth. Slowly, she stood up. "I come." Daniel smiled slightly. "All right, let's go." They walked through the camp, passing rows of human soldiers preparing to leave. Many gave Mira curious or suspicious glances. She kept her head down, instinct telling her not to attract attention. "You don't have to do that," Daniel said quietly. Mira glanced at him. "Do what?" "Keep your head down like you're afraid. No one here will hurt you." Mira wasn't sure about that. She could feel the stares, the whispers. "Why?" she asked. Daniel raised an eyebrow. "Why what?" "Why? You help." The words felt strange in her mouth. She hadn't spoken much in a long time. Daniel was quiet for a moment before answering. "Because it's the right thing to do." Mira frowned. "Right?" "Yeah," Daniel said. "You're not an enemy. You didn't choose this war. You were just caught in it, like a lot of people. Helping you is the right thing to do." Mira didn't understand. The Zarkali had never spoken of right and wrong, only power and survival. She had never met someone like Daniel before. As they walked, a soldier stepped in front of them. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and had a cold expression. "Captain Holt," he said, his eyes flicking to Mira. "Taking a pet for a walk." Daniel's jaw tightened. "She's not a pet. Ramirez." Ramirez smirked. "Looks like one to me. Pretty little trophy." He leaned toward Mira. "Tell me, does she even understand human speech?" Mira's hands clenched into fists. She understood his words well enough. The tone, the meaning. She had heard it before. From her own kind, from humans, those who saw her as nothing more than an object. Daniel stepped in front of her. "She's not a trophy," he said firmly. "And she's not yours to insult." Ramirez scoffed. "Relax, Captain. Just having a bit of fun." He turned and walked away, still chuckling. Daniel exhaled, shaking his head. "Ignore him." Mira didn't respond. Her heart was pounding. In the past, she would have stayed silent, accepted the words, accepted her place. But now, something felt different. Daniel had stood up for her. That was new. They continued walking, but Mira's mind was racing. She had spent years believing humans were cruel, that they would treat her no better than the Zarkali had. But Daniel was proving her wrong. And that scared her more than anything. The camp was busy with soldiers packing supplies and preparing to leave. The war was over, and soon, everyone would return home. But Mira had no home to return to. She sat near the fire, watching as the humans moved around, talking, laughing, and making plans for their future. She did not understand this kind of life. The Zarkali had taught her that war never ended, that the strong ruled and the weak obeyed. But these humans, they were different. They had won the war, yet they were not acting like conquerors. Nearby, Daniel Holt sat on a wooden crate, checking his weapon. He glanced at Mira. "You okay?" Mira hesitated, then nodded slowly. Daniel sighed. "You don't have to stay quiet all the time. You know, you can talk." Mira looked at him. She wanted to believe him, but words had always been dangerous for her. In the past, speaking without permission had led to pain. Even now, speaking felt wrong. Daniel seemed to understand. He reached into his bag and pulled out a small notebook and a pen. He flipped to a blank page and wrote something down before showing it to her. "Mira." She stared at the letters. Daniel tapped the word. "That's your name in human writing." Mira's eyes widened slightly. The Zarkali had never taught her to read or write. Words had power, and slaves were not meant to have power. But here was Daniel, showing her something she was never allowed to learn. He pointed at the letters again. M-I-R-A, Mira. Slowly, Mira reached out and traced the letters with her fingers. It felt strange, but also important. Daniel smiled. "You want to learn." Mira hesitated. She was afraid. Afraid that if she said yes, this kindness would disappear. But deep inside, something pushed her forward. "Yes," she whispered. Daniel's smile widened. "All right then. Let's start." For the next few hours, Daniel taught her simple human words. He wrote them down and had her repeat them. Food, fire, sky, water, freedom. That last word made her pause. She pointed at it. "What mean?" Daniel looked at her, his expression thoughtful. "It means you can make your own choices. No one owns you. You decide what you want." Mira frowned. Choice, dangerous. Daniel shook his head. "No, not here. Not anymore." Mira wasn't sure if she believed him, but she wanted to. Later that evening, as the sun began to set, Daniel handed her another ration pack. She accepted it, but hesitated. "You don't have to wait for permission," Daniel said gently. "If you're hungry, eat." Mira looked at him. Even after a whole day of learning, her mind still struggled to accept his words. "Zarkali say, weak follow strong," she said carefully. Daniel leaned forward, resting his arms on his knees. "That's what they taught you. But it's not true. Strength isn't about control. It's about protecting others, about standing up for what's right." Mira lowered her gaze. "Not know what right is." Daniel nodded. "That's okay. You'll learn." For a long time, neither of them spoke. The fire crackled, and in the distance, soldiers laughed and talked. Then, Mira did something she never thought she would do. She reached for the pen and notebook, and with shaky hands, tried to copy the letters Daniel had shown her earlier. M-I-R-A. Daniel watched quietly, then nodded. "Good job." Mira felt something strange in her chest, a warmth she didn't understand. It was not fear, not pain. Maybe, just maybe, it was hope. Night had fallen over the camp. The stars stretched across the sky like tiny lights, endless and quiet. The humans sat around fires, talking, laughing, and resting after a long war. But Mira could not rest. She sat outside Daniel's tent, staring at the flames in front of her. Her hands were wrapped around the small notebook he had given her. She had spent the day learning human words, copying letters, and speaking more than she had in years. But now, in the silence of the night, fear crept back into her mind. She knew this feeling well. The Zarkali had trained her to expect pain after kindness. They had given her food before taking it away. They had shown her mercy before punishing her. Every time she had begun to believe she was safe, they reminded her she was nothing. She tightened her grip on the notebook. Was this all a trick? The flap of the tent opened, and Daniel Holt stepped out. He stretched his arms and let out a tired sigh before noticing Mira. "You should be sleeping." Mira didn't answer. She was not sure what she was allowed to say. Daniel sat down next to her, placing a metal cup filled with water between them. He didn't force her to take it. He just let it sit there. After a moment, Mira reached out and picked up the cup. She drank slowly, her mind still troubled. Daniel watched the fire. "You seem different tonight." Mira hesitated, then whispered, "Why? Help me?" Daniel glanced at her. "Because it's the right thing to do." Mira shook her head. "No one helped me before." Daniel's jaw tightened. Then they were wrong. Silence. The fire crackled, and the cool night breeze brushed against them. Mira looked at the notebook in her hands. Slowly, she spoke again. "Zarkali say, I am weak. I am nothing." Daniel's expression hardened. They lied. Mira flinched slightly. She was not used to people getting angry on her behalf. Daniel turned to her, his voice calmer. "You are not weak. You survived. You made it through everything they did to you, and you're still here. That's not weakness." Mira lowered her gaze. "Not know how. Be free." Daniel sighed. "That's okay. No one expects you to understand everything right away. Freedom isn't something you learn in a day." He paused. "But you have a choice now. That's what matters." Mira stared at the notebook again. The letters she had written earlier were still there, clear and solid. Mira, her name. Her own name, written by her own hand. A choice. She took a deep breath and looked at Daniel. "Teach me more." A small smile appeared on his face. "All right." That night, for the first time in years, Mira allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, her future could be different. The morning sun rose over the camp, casting a golden glow on the scattered tents and equipment. The air was filled with the sounds of soldiers packing their belongings, preparing to leave. The war was over. The human army was returning home. Mira stood near the edge of the camp, watching everything with quiet uncertainty. The humans had given her food, shelter, and even the freedom to choose her own path. But now, as the camp was being dismantled, a new fear settled in her heart. Where would she go? She glanced at Daniel Holt, who was securing his belongings onto a transport vehicle. Over the past few days, he had been patient with her, teaching her human words, answering her questions, and treating her like a person instead of a prisoner. She had never met anyone like him. But now, he would leave too. Mira didn't know if she had the right to ask for anything. She wasn't Zarkali anymore, but she wasn't truly human either. She was nothing. Daniel noticed her standing there, her hands gripping the small notebook he had given her. He walked over, wiping sweat from his forehead. "You all right?" Mira hesitated before asking the question that had been haunting her all morning. "Where I go?" Daniel's expression softened. "That's up to you." Mira looked away. "Don't know. Where belong?" Daniel was silent for a moment, then said, "You could come with us." Mira's eyes widened slightly. With humans. He nodded. I'm going back to Earth. It's not perfect, but it's better than staying here with nothing. He studied her face carefully. If you want to come, I won't stop you. Mira felt her heart race. A part of her wanted to say yes immediately. She had spent her whole life being told what to do, where to go. Now, she had a choice, but it scared her. What if not belong? She whispered. Daniel gave her a small smile. You'll figure it out. Mira looked at the soldiers loading onto the transport ships. She was afraid of this new world, afraid of what would happen next. But she was more afraid of staying behind, alone and uncertain. Slowly, she clutched the notebook to her chest and nodded. I go. Daniel's smile grew. All right then, let's get you home. For the first time in her life, Mira took a step toward the unknown. Not as a prisoner, not as a spoil of war, but as someone with a future. Mira sat quietly inside the transport ship, her fingers gripping the seat's edge as the engines roared to life. The floor vibrated beneath her feet as the ship slowly lifted off. Through the small window beside her, she saw the barren battlefield fading into the distance. She was leaving it behind. Forever. The thought made her chest feel strange. She had dreamed of escaping the Zarkali many times, but she had never imagined this. Traveling to the human homeworld, Earth. It felt unreal. Across from her, Daniel Holt sat with his arms crossed, watching her with a calm expression. You okay? He asked over the hum of the engines. Mira hesitated before giving a small nod. Not used to this. Daniel smiled slightly. You'll get used to it. Mira glanced around the ship. Soldiers sat in rows, talking quietly or checking their gear. Some threw her curious glances, but no one spoke to her. She understood why. To them, she was still an outsider. A voice crackled through the speakers. Prepare for jump to FTL. Mira frowned. FTL. Daniel leaned forward slightly. Faster than light travel. It'll feel strange the first time, but don't worry. Just close your eyes if it makes you dizzy. She nodded, gripping the seat tighter. A deep hum filled the ship as the engines powered up. Then suddenly, everything stretched. Light blurred. Her stomach dropped as if she were falling, even though she wasn't moving. Then, silence. Mira slowly opened her eyes. Through the window, space had transformed. Instead of a black void, there were glowing streams of light twisting and bending around them. It was like nothing she had ever seen before. Daniel chuckled at her wide-eyed expression. Beautiful, isn't it? Mira only nodded. She didn't have words for what she was seeing. Hours passed. Mira sat quietly as the soldiers around her talked, laughed, and played card games. They seemed relaxed, happy to be heading home. Daniel handed her a ration pack. You should eat. Mira took it, but hesitated. Will humans accept me? Daniel sighed, leaning back against the seat. It won't be easy. Some people might not trust you, but that doesn't mean you don't belong. Mira lowered her gaze. I don't know how to be human. You don't have to be, Daniel said. Just be you. Mira thought about that. The Zarkali had never allowed her to be herself. They had shaped her into what they wanted. A servant, a tool. Now, for the first time, she had no orders to follow, no master to obey. She had no idea who she really was. Daniel tapped her notebook. Keep learning. Keep asking questions. That's how you find your place. Mira held the notebook close. For now, it was the only thing that made her feel like she was moving forward. The stars outside the window blurred again as the ship continued its journey. And for the first time in her life, Mira felt like she was going somewhere that truly mattered. The transport ship shuddered as it entered Earth's atmosphere. Mira clutched the armrest, her heart pounding as the vibrations grew stronger. Outside the window, the endless darkness of space faded, replaced by blue skies and white clouds. Earth. Her fingers tightened around her notebook. She had spent her entire life on alien warships and battlefields. Now she was about to set foot on a planet she had never imagined seeing. Daniel Holt sat beside her, relaxed as if this was just another routine flight. He glanced at her and gave a reassuring nod. Almost there. Mira didn't answer. Her stomach felt strange. Not fear, not pain. Something else. Anticipation. The ship landed with a soft thud, and a mechanical hiss filled the air as the doors opened. A rush of fresh, warm air flooded inside, carrying scents Mira had never smelled before. Something sweet, something green, something alive. One by one, the soldiers stepped out onto a metal platform. Mira followed cautiously, her bare feet meeting solid ground. Then she saw it. Stretching far beyond the landing zone was a vast landscape of rolling hills, towering trees, and an endless sky filled with golden sunlight. Birds soared above, their wings cutting through the air. The wind carried the scent of flowers and fresh earth. It was nothing like the cold metal walls she had lived in for so long. Daniel stepped beside her. "Welcome to Earth." Mira swallowed hard. "It's big." He chuckled. "Yeah, it is." She turned her head, watching the soldiers reunite with their families. People embraced, laughed, and cried. It was something she had never witnessed before. The Zarkali did not believe in such emotions. A small child ran past, giggling as he was lifted into a soldier's arms. Mira stared, unsure what to feel. Daniel noticed. "Ever seen a child before?" Mira shook her head. Daniel hesitated before saying, "They're the reason we fight, so they can grow up safe, without war." Mira thought about that. The Zarkali had never spoken of fighting for others. They fought only to conquer. "Come on," Daniel said, gesturing forward. "We need to check in." Mira followed, her steps slow, her mind struggling to take in everything. She was truly here, on Earth. But what came next? Inside the base, everything was different from what Mira expected. Humans did not treat her like a prisoner, but she could feel their eyes on her. Some were curious, others were wary. She stayed close to Daniel as they walked through the halls. Every now and then, someone would stop to greet him. He would return the greeting, but he never let Mira feel like she was alone. Finally, they entered a quiet room. A woman in a military uniform sat behind a desk, her sharp eyes studying Mira. "This is her?" the woman asked. Daniel nodded. "Her name is Mira." The woman glanced at a file. Normally, non-human individuals go through processing, but given the circumstances, we'll make an exception. She turned her gaze to Mira. "You're not a prisoner here, but you'll have to learn how to live among us." Mira nodded slowly. "I'd learn." The woman's expression softened slightly. "Good." She handed Daniel a folder. "She's your responsibility for now." Daniel took it. "Understood." As they left the office, Mira turned to him. "What now?" Daniel smiled. "Now, we find you a home." Mira's heart skipped a beat. A home. For the first time in her life, she dared to hope. Mira sat in the passenger seat of a military transport vehicle as it moved through a long road surrounded by green fields and tall trees. The sky stretched endlessly above, filled with soft white clouds. The air smelled fresh, different from the metallic scent of warships and battlefields she had known all her life. Beside her, Daniel Holt drove with one hand on the wheel, his other resting casually on the armrest. He had told her they were going to his home, a place where she could stay until she figured out her own path. Mira tightened her grip on the small notebook in her lap. She had spent so much time learning human words, but even now she didn't know how to describe what she was feeling. "Quiet back there," Daniel said, glancing at her with a small smile. "Nervous?" Mira hesitated, then gave a slow nod. "Not no. What do next?" Daniel nodded in understanding. "That's okay. No one expects you to know everything right away." Mira looked out the window. What if not belong? Daniel's hands tightened slightly on the wheel. "You've been told your whole life that you're nothing. that you have no place. His voice was calm but firm. But that was a lie. You do belong. You just need time to see it for yourself. Mira lowered her gaze. Time. That was something the Zarkali never gave. An hour later, the vehicle pulled into a quiet town. It was nothing like the military base. There were no soldiers marching, no weapons being carried. Instead, there were small houses, clean streets, and people walking freely. Children played outside, their laughter filling the air. Mira stared. She had never seen a place so peaceful. Daniel parked in front of a small house with a white fence. Here we are, he said, stepping out. Mira followed, her steps hesitant. She had spent so much time preparing herself for survival, but she didn't know how to prepare for this. Daniel opened the door and gestured for her to step inside. Mira entered slowly. The air inside was warm, carrying the scent of something familiar. Food. She looked around. The house was small but welcoming. A couch, a dining table, shelves filled with books. There were pictures on the wall, images of people, moments frozen in time. She didn't recognize the faces, but they looked happy. This is your home now, too, Daniel said. Mira turned to him, uncertain. Home. He nodded. You don't have to be afraid here. No one will hurt you. No one will control you. You can just live. Mira swallowed hard. Not know. How live. Daniel gave her a reassuring look. Then we'll figure it out together. For the first time, Mira felt something deep inside her, a flicker of something unfamiliar. It was not fear, not pain. Maybe, just maybe, it was hope. Mira woke to the soft glow of morning light streaming through the window. The air in the small room was warm, carrying the scent of fresh earth and something sweet, flowers perhaps. She lay still for a moment, listening. There were no harsh commands, no distant sounds of worships, no chains, just quiet. She sat up slowly, her fingers brushing against the soft fabric of the blanket. It still felt strange to sleep in a bed, to wake up without fear. Daniel Holt had given her this room, a space of her own. She wasn't sure what to do with it yet, but for the first time, it belonged to her. After a moment, she stood and stepped out of the room. The house was peaceful. In the kitchen, Daniel was making something on the stove, humming softly to himself. He glanced at her and smiled. Morning. Did you sleep okay? Mira hesitated before giving a small nod. Yes. Daniel placed a plate on the table. Here, try this. Mira sat down cautiously. The plate held something golden and round, with syrup drizzled over it. She picked up a fork, mimicking how Daniel used his, and took a small bite. Sweet, warm, unlike anything she had tasted before. Daniel chuckled. Good. Mira nodded slowly. Yes, good. He leaned back in his chair. So, what do you want to do today? Mira paused. No one had ever asked her that before. She had always been told what to do. She looked down at her notebook, running her fingers over the pages. Learn more about humans. Daniel smiled. All right, let's start with something simple. They walked through the small town, and Mira observed everything carefully. People greeted each other with smiles. Children ran through the streets, playing. A woman sat on a bench, reading a book, completely unafraid. This world was so different from the one she had known. Daniel took her to a market, where people sold fresh food, clothes, and handmade items. Mira hesitated when a vendor smiled at her, offering a piece of fruit. For you, the woman said kindly. Mira looked at Daniel, unsure. No need? Daniel shook his head. Not everything comes with a price, Mira. Sometimes people are just kind. She took the fruit carefully, as if it might disappear. When she bit into it, the sweet juice filled her mouth. She had never been given something freely before. As the sun set, they sat outside Daniel's house, watching the sky turn shades of orange and pink. Mira turned to him. We'll always Feel different. Daniel thought for a moment. Maybe. But that doesn't mean you don't belong. Mira was quiet. Then, slowly, she said, I want to learn more. Want to be more. Daniel smiled. Then you will. Mira looked at the sky, the stars beginning to appear. She had come from darkness, from chains and fear. But here, on this strange new world, she had something she had never had before. A future. And for the first time, she believed she could make it her own.